Hey, I'm Brad from Fix This Build That, and today I'm going to show you how to make this concrete top outdoor coffee table. The base is made from cedar. The construction is extremely easy, so anybody can make this. This was my first time working with concrete, and I screwed up a lot of things. So make sure you watch and get some of the pointers and see what I did wrong so that you can do it right when you make your own.
The base of the coffee table is made from cedar 2x4s. I started by cutting the 2 aprons, which will connect the sides, and a lower stretcher that will run along the bottom. The sides are basically a simple rectangle. I cut a top and a bottom for each side, and a center support piece that are all the same size. Each side has 2 vertical legs, which are the shortest pieces of the base. And I was able to get all these parts out of just 3 8-foot 2x4s. With all the cuts done, I sorted through the pieces to find the best side of each board, and then I marked the other sides with a pencil. I used pocket hole joints for this build for quick and easy assembly. It's a perfect application for them because all the holes will be hidden when the table is fully assembled. I drilled pocket holes on the back side of all the parts except for the legs. The first thing I assembled was the sides. The legs are joined to the top and the bottom with glue and 2.5-inch exterior pocket screws. I used a clamp to hold the parts together to minimize any shifting as the screws went through. I did the same thing for the other side, and then my assemblies were done. Next, I flipped the side assemblies on edge and connected one of the aprons. I clamped the parts down to the work table using a face clamp. This makes sure that everything is flush and secured. Then I put them together with glue and screws. I repeated this for the other side using the same method. Then I flipped the table over and attached the lower stretcher to the bottom, making sure that the bottom of the stretcher was flush with the bottom of the sides. The last part of the table base is to install a center support on the top to help with the weight of the concrete. That concrete is really heavy. I used a scrap block to make sure that the support was flush with the aprons, and then I secured it with glue and screws as well. And that's it, now the base is done. I told you this one is quick and easy. Next I moved on to making the form for the concrete. I bought a full 4x8 sheet of 3/4-inch melamine, but I had them cut a 3-foot section off the end that I'd be getting all my parts from. This made it a lot easier to transport as well as to work with. First I cut off a section to use for the long sides, and I ripped them down to 1.5 inches. This is going to be the thickness of the top. I cross-cut another section for the short sides using my cordless circular saw, and I ripped those down to 1.5 inches as well. I wanted the top to be flush with the sides and have no overhang, so I needed a perfect fit here. To do this, I turned the table base upside down on the oversized melamine and I built the form around it. This way, if the base was slightly off on my dimensions or even if it was a little bit out of square, it really wouldn't matter and the top would fit perfectly. I secured the long sides first using 2-inch screws, then I used one of the short sides as a temporary clamp to reference against while pre-drilling. That way I could move the table and not hit it with the drill when I'm doing my pre-drills. All the screws were countersunk below the surface to allow for screeding the concrete later. You'll see what I mean when I get there. After the long sides were in place, I cut the short sides to fit and I installed them the same way. The sides wanted to lift up a little bit off the form when I was driving the screw at first, but I found that backing them out and then driving them home all the way with my weight on the side would really eliminate that gap and pull the 2 pieces tight. With the form complete, I grabbed the shop vac and vacuumed up all the dust to make sure there's no particles left over. Then I caulked all the seams with a silicone caulk. I used a corner tool to get smooth beads on the edges, because any small bumps are going to translate in through that concrete. To finish up, I put some tape over all the screws so the concrete wouldn't get into the screw heads. After the silicone was dry, I laid a rebar grid over the form and I eyeballed where I needed to cut it. I then used some bolt cutters and cut it down so there's about 1 inch in from all the sides. Lastly, I cleaned up the form with some rubbing alcohol to get rid of any residue and be prepped for the concrete. Like I said in the intro, this was my first go at mixing concrete. I got a 9-gallon mixing tub with the intent of mixing 1.5 80-pound bags in it. And here's where I started my series of concrete mixing fails. Lesson number 1, don't pour the entire bag into your mixing tub and then add the water. It was super hard to get it all mixed consistently doing this way versus adding smaller amounts of concrete and water one after the other. Lesson 2, use the right sized mixing tub. As I was mixing the concrete, I was really focused on getting the right consistency and not really on the size of the tub. At this point, I didn't really think that I could place the current batch and mix a new batch and get it all in there within the 30-minute working time. So I admired all my hard work mixing, chalked it up to learning, and I went out and bought a bigger tub. The 21-gallon tub is what I'd recommend if you plan on mixing more than one bag at a time, And if you're going to do 3 or more, I'd say go ahead and rent a small mixer and save your back. This time I did it right. I mixed in small portions of cement and water, which made this way easier. I kept going until I had 1.5 bags mixed and about the consistency of peanut butter. And I want to give a shout out here to DIY Pete and Ben Ueda. They both have great YouTube channels, which I'll link to below, and I watched a bunch of their videos to make sure I got all the pointers on how to work with concrete. I started filling the form and working with the concrete until it was about 1 inch thick. Then I took the rebar that I had cut earlier and I pressed it into the concrete, giving it a little flex to make it lay flat. Then I covered it with more concrete to get to the top of the form. After moving it around with my hands, I used a straight piece of wood to screed the surface. You ride the board along the top of the form in a sawing motion, and this levels and distributes the concrete. At this point, I had an audience watching me, and my son was the acting safety captain in the shop.
Oh no. Oh, here comes the power tools. Plug your ears.
I used a cordless reciprocating saw with no blade in it, and I vibrated the form to help release the air bubbles. I finished up by troweling the bottom surface smooth so it would sit flush on the base. While I was waiting for the concrete to dry, I applied my first coat of outdoor spar urethane on the base. I did 1 full strength coat and then 3 coats cut with 50% mineral spirits after this one. After 24 hours, I removed the plastic I'd covered the form with and took out all the screws from the sides. I pried the sides off by hand and gave the exposed edges a quick sanding to break the sharp corners. Lesson 3. Spend more time vibrating the form. I ended up with more air bubbles than I really wanted, so I should have gone around maybe 5 or 10 minutes versus just the couple that I did. We flipped the top over, and then I mixed a slurry of Portland cement to a toothpaste consistency and filled in all the air bubbles on the sides and the top. The cement is a little different than the color of the concrete, so next time I'll probably just do a slurry of the concrete alone. Next, I took the tabletop outside and I sanded it with 120 grit and then 220 grit. Lesson 4. Sand the concrete before doing your slurry coat. The sanding exposed more air bubbles, so I had to repeat this process once more after this. After the top had cured a bit more, I put some sealer on it with a microfiber cloth. I applied several coats until it wouldn't penetrate the surface anymore. Before installing the top, I put on some rubber feet on the bottom of the base to keep the wood away from standing water. I put a dollop of silicone on each end of the top boards to keep them from shifting, and then my wife and I set the top on the base. To install the top without pinching our fingers, we used the form sides as spacers in a 2x4 cut to just less than the height of the spacer. I lifted the top while she pulled out a spacer, and then I rested it on top of the 2x4. Now I just slowly kicked out the 2x4 from underneath and lowered the top in place. After a few minor adjustments, this thing was ready for the porch.
If you want plans for this outdoor coffee table, there's a link down below in the description. Go check it out. You can also see how I made this sofa and this patio cooler. There's a playlist over here. You can check those out. Also, I'd love for you to like, comment, and subscribe down below. Tell me what you think. You can support me on Patreon. And until next time, guys, get out there and build something awesome.